A lot of people wonder from a cultural perspective what happened. And I think that is probably a good place to begin, because a lot of times we don't know where the story began, or I should say part of the story began, because the way that the history books tell us is that our history began with slavery, but there was so much history that predated the early 1500s that we're not taught, that we don't know, that it could lead us to believe that those of us who are descendants are somehow deficient or somehow missing information or somehow being told something that is completely incomplete. So here's what happened. So when you begin to look at the history of West Africa and what was going on during the slave trade, and yes, there are people who said the slave trade didn't happen. I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, they have not spent extensive time in any part of Africa, because there's no way that you can deduct that after spending time in particular in West Africa. So when you begin to look at what was happening, there were people who were captured in different parts of Africa, the Central Africa, East Africa, Northern Africa, West Africa, and they were all placed in these processing plants that we now know as dungeons, houses, any place that you can process something. So basically warehouses. They were not treated as human beings, and so wherever they could be stored after being captured, they would be stored after being captured. They came from all types of ethnic groups. You would have Timene, Mende, Fulani, Yoruba, Ashanti, Fanti. You would have all of these different ethnic groups being placed in one melting pot. And this is one of the reasons why so many people, when they run their genetic history, they see that they descend from most of West Africa. Why is that? Because they carry genetic markers that are indicative of indigenous people who originated in those different areas. So that's what you saw. So they would go to the dungeons, that would be one melting pot. From there, they would get on the ships, that would be another melting pot, and that's where you would see the genetic mixing happening. And then by the time they arrived in Brazil or the Caribbean or some other part of South America or Mexico or Cuba, and then finally into Haiti or Dominican, what we now know as Dominican Republic, and into America, that's why you see this melting pot. And obviously there are debates on who these people were and where they came from and all of that, but when you begin to look at the genetic mix, the genetic melting pot, that's why you see it the way that it is. Now, some people look at that as sort of a stain or some sort of negative way. I look at it as a positive, because you have the best and worst of all of that genetic makeup, to include most of us who have a considerable amount of European DNA flowing through our veins as well. But that is why you see that genetic breakdown. And that's why when somebody says, you're this, you're this, you're this, you're really a combination of so many different things. And that's a beautiful thing, because now as you begin to learn more and more about the positive side of the different cultures, you can lay claim to that too. But that's just in a nutshell, helping you to understand why the melting pot aspect is so important to understanding, and why someone could say, well, you know, I originate in Cote d'Ivoire, but then also can lay claim to Nigeria. And then also understanding that these countries were not formed until 1885, and they were formed by Europeans. So again, to offer a little bit more context, that is a brief breakdown on why you see so many people who are part of the African diaspora with so originating from so many different places on the continent of Africa. Oh, and by the way, Africa is also a name that was given, so that's not even indigenous, but that's a whole nother story.
Open up your eyes and see all the fun and mystery. Take an African adventure with Darren and Destiny. From the mountains to the shore, so many things to explore. Take an African adventure with Darren and Destiny.
The Adventures of Darren and Destiny. And Darren and Destiny are twin brother and sister, and you go on their adventures throughout the African diaspora, meaning so African diaspora destinations, primarily focused in Africa, but we go to South America, we're going to go to the Caribbean. Their first book is going to take you to Ghana, and then we're going to go on a safari. And from there, we're going to go to Ethiopia, and then we go to Salvador, Brazil. And what the goal is to be able to inspire curiosity in the continent of Africa, in our children from a very young age, and to really tell a more accurate story. Most of our children are exposed to negative images, late night infomercials about how bad things are, everybody's sick, everybody's poor, everyone's uneducated, but that's simply not true. So what Darren and Destiny and their family do is they go to different African destinations. They are learning about these different places. You're beginning to see positive images, but still telling the truth. I mean, that's the important thing, to tell the truth about some of the things that have occurred. But it's all done on our children's level so they begin to understand it. And it begins to pique their curiosity. They begin to learn more. And hopefully one day they will want to explore and visit the continent of Africa and its many countries. There's just so much that Darren and Destiny are able to do, and as they're doing it, it's like they begin to open the minds of a new generation, and they don't get bombarded and indoctrinated with negativity. They're actually able to see positivity and inspiring images and messages about the African diaspora, as well as those who are still indigenous to the continent of Africa, and they begin to learn more and just see things differently. So I'm excited about introducing the Adventures of Darren and Destiny.